Before we start, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss any new videos. Imagine finding an old box at a flea market in Madrid. You open it, but instead of perfume or coins, you find a scrap of a map without a scale, with a cross marking a village that no longer exists. Next to it is a Hold Maravedi with Arabic script and a faded photograph of a woman holding a forbidden flag with the wrong stripes. All of this is Spain, but not the Spain that dances flamenco in tourist brochures. This is the other Spain. The one where kings went bankrupt 3 times in a single generation, where gold was kept under siege for 69 days, and where the emperor himself confused grammatical genders because he preferred beer to sherry. Spaniards rarely tell these stories to guests, not because they are ashamed, but because the truth sounds like fiction. Here are 15 such truths. Start reading, and forget about paella and bowls. Fact 1. Spain was a unified country for less time than is commonly believed. The paradox of 2 kings, 1 bed. When a modern person hears Spain, they imagine a unitary state with centuries of history. However, legally and practically, the country we know today has existed for only a little over 300 years, and in terms of real unification, even less. The turning point is traditionally considered to be 1469, the marriage of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. But what happened in the Alcazar of Valladolid was a dynastic union, not the creation of a single state. Castile and Aragon remained completely different worlds. Each kingdom had its own Cortes parliaments, its own laws. The Aragonese fueros were so strong that the king could not introduce a tax without the consent of the nobility. Its own currency, the Castilian maravedi, and the Aragonese florins circulated at different rates, and even their own customs offices on the border between them. Ferdinand, being a cunning politician, solemnly promised the Aragonese nobility never to unite the crowns, and he kept his word. The real turning point came only in 1707 to 1716, after the War of the Spanish Succession. The Bourbon Philip V, grandson of Louis XIV, wanted to rule according to the French model, centralized. He issued the Nueva Planta decrees, which literally erased Aragonese law from existence. The Cortes of Aragon, Catalonia, Valencia, and the Balearic Islands were dissolved, their laws abolished, and their courts replaced by Castilian ones. In response, an uprising flared up in Catalonia, which was drowned in blood, and the city of Alcoy, for example, was burned to the ground for daring to mint its own coin. Thus, Spain as a unitary state was born not in the Middle Ages, but in the 18th century, later than Prussia or the Russia of Peter the Great. Even today, in conversation, Spaniards often say Castile instead of Spain, for example, Castellano as the name of the language, and the phrase Las Españas, the plural form, is still used in legal texts, reminding us that the country is a tangle of historical territories. Fact 2. San Juan de la Peña Monastery, a living witness of 11 centuries, carved into the rock in the Spanish Pyrenees, in the province of Huesca, there is a place that historians call the Cradle of Aragon. This is the monastery of San Juan de la Peña, which translates as St. John of the Cliff. It is unique not only for its architecture. The lower monastery is carved directly into a rocky ledge overhanging a precipice, but also for its continuous history. It has never been empty since the year 920. Imagine 1,100 years without a single interruption. Through Moorish invasions, the Arabs didn't even try to storm the cliff, through the Black Death epidemics, through the persecution of monasteries under 19th century liberals, and through the Civil War of 1936 to 39, when refugees took shelter within its walls. But the most interesting part is the legend of the Holy Grail. In the 12th century, according to one version, The very chalice from which Christ drank at the Last Supper was kept here. The monks allegedly brought it from Rome, saving it from the barbarians. The chalice rested in the monastery for almost 300 years until the Aragonese King Martin I the Humanist moved it to his chapel in Zaragoza, and from there it made its way to Valencia, where it remains today in the cathedral, inscribed with lapis, ex quo Christus comedit, the stone from which Christ ate. During the Napoleonic Wars, French soldiers entered the monastery to burn it down. However, having climbed up and seeing that the building was literally pressed into the cliff, and that there was nothing to set on fire but the stone itself, they spat and left. The monks emerged from hiding 3 days later, and the service continued. Today in the Monastery Museum, you can see a strange artifact, a list of donations from 1492, where among others, an unknown caballero from Granada is recorded, likely the last Muslim ruler who fled the city after the fall of the emirate. Such a coexistence of cultures became possible only in this corner forgotten by time. Fact 3. The Alhambra Decree of 1492. How a financial pyramid expelled 200,000 people. Historical memory often blames the Spanish Inquisition for the expulsion of the Jews, but this is a convenient yet incorrect version. The Inquisition, established in 1478, dealt only with baptized Christians suspected of practicing Judaism in secret. It had no authority to expel an entire religious community. The decisive document was the Alhambra Decree of March 31, 1492, signed by Isabella and Ferdinand. The reasons were purely mercantile and political. By 1492, the crown's treasury was exhausted by the 10-year war for Granada, the last Moorish stronghold. The monarchs owed huge sums to Jewish bankers from Seville, Toledo, and Zaragoza. For instance, the Abarbanel family loaned them 30,000 ducats in just 1 year. In addition, influential church circles, primarily the Dominican Tomás de Torquemada, convinced the monarchs that the presence of Jews provoked new conversos, to return to their old faith. The decree gave the Jews 4 months, either convert to Christianity and stay, or leave the country. Leaving behind all gold, silver, and coins, they were allowed to take only movable property, excluding precious metals. According to various estimates, between 150,000 and 200,000 people left, about 5% of the population of Spain at the time. Another 50,000 chose to be baptized and stay, forming the Chueta social class in Majorca and the Marranos in Castile, who were suspected of heresy for centuries. Irony of fate. The very Catholic monarchs who expelled the Jews realized a few decades later that they had dealt a severe blow to their own economy. Spain lost its best doctors, diplomats, translators, and financiers. Meanwhile, the exiles Sephardim established prosperous communities in Thessaloniki, Istanbul, and Amsterdam, where they still speak Ladino, a 15th century version of Spanish that died out long ago in Spain itself, preserving, for example, the old pronunciation of S and Z and archaic expressions like a sugar, to forget, instead of the modern alvidar. Fact 4. Conquistadors as risk entrepreneurs. How 180 men overthrew an empire without the king's orders. School textbooks write Spain conquered America, but the reality was closer to a venture startup with human lives instead of shares. The Crown issued a document called a capitulation, a license for conquest specifying the shares. 20% of all gold, silver, and pearls found went to the king, and the rest went to the organizer and his men. But this was not state funding. Equipping ships, buying horses, each cost as much as a modern car. Weapons, provisions, everything was private. When Hernán Cortés sailed from Cuba to the mainland in 1519, he had 11 ships, 508 soldiers, and 16 horses. The governor of Cuba, Velázquez, fearing that Cortés would betray him, revoked the license. Cortés ignored the order, effectively becoming a rebel. Upon reaching Veracruz, in an act of defiance, he founded a city and appointed his own municipality, which immediately named him commander-in-chief. Then came the famous scuttling of the ships, more precisely, an order to sink 9 of the 11, leaving one for communication with Spain. The men had nowhere to retreat. They conquered Mexico despite being outnumbered by the enemy 1 to 200,000. Francisco Pizarro went even further. His third expedition to Peru, 1531, consisted of 180 men and 37 horses, fewer than a company of modern paratroopers. It was funded by Panamanian merchants, and Pizarro himself mortgaged all his property and convinced his brothers to sell their house. They were opposed by Atahualpa's army of 80,000 warriors. Pizarro, like Cortés, acted without royal permission. He received his capitulation retroactively, only after the first shipment of gold, weighing more than 1.5 tons for the emperor's ransom alone, was sent to Spain. The moral: the Spanish crown in America was less of a conqueror and more of an extortionist running protection rackets on private plunder. Fact 5. The first empire where the sun never set. Charles V and his stuttering court. The phrase, the empire on which the sun never sets, is firmly associated with the British Victorian era. However, it was coined 300 years before that, and it was coined about Spain. By 1530, Charles I of Spain, better known as Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, ruled a territory stretching from the Philippines, where the Spaniards established a settlement in 1521, to Tierra del Fuego. Every single day, the sun illuminated one of his flags. But this fact was the result of marriage contracts and fortunate deaths, rather than Spanish might. Charles inherited the Netherlands from his father, Philip the Handsome, Spain and its colonies from his mother, Joanna the Mad, and Austria and the rights to the empire from his grandfather, Maximilian. But here is a detail textbooks keep quiet about. Charles spoke Spanish with a heavy accent because his native tongue was French, the Burgundian court. He painfully studied Castilian as an adult, often mixed up endings, and could not stand Spanish cuisine, preferring beer and raw smoked meats. His court was a Tower of Babel. His entourage spoke Flemish, German, Italian, and Latin. Once in Toledo Cathedral, he tried to deliver a speech in Spanish, stumbled, swore in German, and finished in French. The sun did not set on his empire, but the emperor himself felt like an eternal outsider. He traveled his domains with a caravan of 5,000 people, cooks, guards, cartographers, scribes, even his own jester. Every such journey ruined the province he stepped into. Taxes would double. When he abdicated in 1556 and retired to the monastery of Yuste in Extremadura, he requested that during his funeral service, the cross of Burgundy be placed on his coffin instead of the Spanish flag. Fact 6. The Spanish bankruptcies of the 16th century. Why silver could not save the country. The cultural code has preserved an image of Spain's golden age, treasure galleons, lace collars, the palaces of El Escorial. However, the economic reality was catastrophic. Philip II, son of Charles V, declared state bankruptcy 3 times, in 1557, 1575, and 1596. How is this possible in a country receiving tons of American silver? Simple arithmetic. In the 1550s, the Castilian tax base brought in about 1.2 million ducats a year. Military expenditures, the war with France, the fleet against the Ottomans, suppressing the rebellion in the Netherlands, amounted to 4 to 5 million. The deficit was covered by loans from Genoese and German banks against future shipments of silver. But ships with silver took 60 to 120 days to cross the ocean, and if the fleet was delayed by storms, pirates, or just bad weather, the crown could not pay its bills. In 1575, a crisis occurred that historians call the First Global Panic. The silver fleet from Veracruz was 2 months late. It had been driven off by English privateers. Philip II declared a moratorium on all payments. Terrified Genoese bankers demanded their loans back, but the treasury was empty. As a result, a domino effect collapsed businesses across Europe. A bank in Lisbon, a merchant house in Antwerp, a wool manufactory in Burgos. Everyone was waiting for Spanish ducats. In Spain itself, they returned to bartering for 2 years. Doctors took payment in chickens, and tailors took pieces of canvas. The paradox of silver was that most of it leaked to China via the Philippines. The Chinese demanded payment in silver for silk and porcelain. Spanish reals could be found in Beijing and Tokyo, but not in the pocket of a Madrid baker. Fact 7. Pellagra, the disease Spain received as a gift from Mexico. Corn maize was brought to Spain from New Spain in the mid-16th century. At first, it was a rarity, grown as a curiosity in the botanical gardens of Seville. But by the 1600s, Asturian and Galician peasants discovered that corn yielded 3 times more grain per unit of land than wheat and did not require heavy plows. A corn revolution began in the north of the country. A generation later came an epidemic of a strange disease. People's skin peeled on their hands and necks, bright pink spots appeared, mal de la rosa, followed by diarrhea, dementia, and death. Doctors called it Italian leprosy or the Asturian evil. No one linked the disease to corn because the Mayan and Aztec Indians had spent centuries preparing maize with alkali limestone water, which released niacin, vitamin B3. Europeans, however, milled corn into flour and baked flatbreads just like wheat, without alkaline processing. By 1730, pellagra became the second leading cause of death after tuberculosis in rural Galicia. In the 19th century, Dr. Gaspar Casal, who grew up in a village where his parents died of pellagra, published a treatise describing 723 cases, proving the connection to a corn monodiet. The medical community rejected him. It cannot be that a gift from God kills. It wasn't until 1915, thanks to the work of the American Joseph Goldberger, that the cause was officially recognized. By that time, pellagra had claimed, by various estimates, between 300,000 and 500,000 lives, more than smallpox and cholera combined. In remote villages of Asturias, it continued to be recorded until the 1950s, when Francoist autarky gave way to wheat imports. Fact 8. Why the Spanish language is officially called Castilian, and how it threatens tourists. Article 3 of the 1978 Spanish Constitution states, Castilian is the official state language. All Spaniards have the duty to know it and the right to use it. The word Español is absent from the text. This is not an accidental slip of the pen by the fathers of the Constitution, but the result of long negotiations with Catalan, Basque, and Galician nationalists who refused to recognize their language as a dialect of Spanish. Their argument, Spanish implies the entire peninsula, and there are 4 other languages with official status living there. The term Castellano is accurate both geographically. Its birthplace is the Kingdom of Castile, and historically, Antonio de Nebrija, in 1492, named his grammar book Grammatica de la Lengua Castellana. The funniest thing is that until the 18th century, people in Castile itself did not say Español. They used the word Romance, like Roman, in France, Vulgar Latin. The term Español first appears in the 13th century poem of Santiago as the adjective Spanish, in relation to the king, not the language. The final shift occurred under Charles III, when foreign travelers asked, "What language is spoken here?" They were answered in Castilian, El Español, because foreigners did not distinguish internal differences. Today, the situation is sensitive. If a tourist in Barcelona asks, "Habla Español?" a Catalan might reply, See, hablo Catalan. Castellano? También, pero prefiero mi lengua. And this is not rudeness. It is a reminder of the 300-year ban on Catalan under Franco. Many residents of Valencia or the Balearic Islands, where Catalan is spoken, call Spanish Castellano in everyday life, never using the word Español, as if it were a foreign language. Fact 9. 700 years of a single currency. The Maravedi from the Caliphs to Isabella II. The Muslim conquest of 711 did not abolish money. For the first 50 years after the invasion, the Arabs minted coins with Latin inscriptions because the population refused to accept dirhams with Arabic script. By the 10th century, a bimetallic standard was established in the Caliphate of Al-Andalus, the gold dinar for 0.25 G and the silver dirham 2.97 G. But the most amazing part began after the collapse of the Caliphate into taifas, small emirates. The Christian kings of Castile and Aragon, needing money for the Reconquista, began to copy Muslim coins, deliberately including mistakes. On the counterfeit gold dinars, the Arabic calligraphy was so distorted that instead of Allah is one, it turned into something like Alad is one. This was done so the coin wouldn't be considered blasphemous, while still remaining recognizable in trade with Muslims. In 1172, King Alfonso VIII introduced a coin called the Maravedi, from the Arabic Maravedin, the gold coin of the Almoravids. And this Maravedi survived everything. The fall of Granada, 1492, the expulsion of the Muslims, 1609, the Inquisition, and the Napoleonic invasion. It changed metal, becoming silver, then copper, and changed weight, but the name remained. The last Maravedis were minted in 1848 under Queen Isabella II, 677 years after the first Maravedis appeared under Alfonso. It is one of the longest-lived denominations in the history of money. Today, the Museum of the Royal Academy of History houses a unique hoard found in Tordesillas, 50 coins from the same era, 15th century, among which are Christian Maravedis, Arabic dirhams, and Portuguese reals inscribed within hoc signo vinces. There also lies a Maravedi with the fingerprint of the minter, a human touch from the year 1348. Fact 10. The papal ban on bullfighting that lasted 200 years. Today, bullfighting is perceived as a symbol of Spain alongside the flag and the guitar. However, for 2 centuries, the Catholic Church did everything in its power to destroy it. In 1567, Pope Pius V, an ascetic man, he banned uncovering statues of saints and wearing overly bright vestments, issued the bull De Salute Gratis. It stated, "Anyone who organizes or witnesses a bullfight where animals die a cruel death for the amusement of the crowd is subject to excommunication. A person who dies in a bullfight cannot be buried on consecrated ground." This was not just a ban. It meant that a bullfighter gored by a bull went straight to hell from the Church's point of view, and the spectator risked eternal damnation. Philip II's reaction was immediate. He sent an envoy to Rome with gifts, including 20 Arabian horses and a handwritten Quran from Granada, and a request to reconsider the bull. A compromise was found a year later. The new Pope, Gregory XIII, allowed bullfighting in exceptional cases, in honor of coronations, victories over infidels, and visits by heads of state. But any other fight remained banned. Spanish bishops took advantage of this loophole. They declared any bullfight a celebration in honor of the victory over the Moors, even though the last Moors had been expelled in 1609. This continued until the 1770s, when Charles III, an enlightened despot who never missed a fight in Madrid himself, asked Pope Clement XIV to lift the ban completely. The Pope agreed on the condition that bullfights would not be held on Sundays and in the presence of clerics. But even after this, many priests refused to bury bullfighters within church walls. A famous case occurred in Ronda, the cradle of modern bullfighting, where in 1829 a priest allowed a fallen matador to be buried only outside the cemetery fence, tying the coffin with a rope to the iron railing, supposedly meaning on consecrated ground, but formally outside it. Fact 11. The Battle of Balen, a victory they couldn't exploit due to a lack of maps. On July 19, 1808, an event occurred that shocked Europe. In an Andalusian valley near Jaén, 22,000 Spaniards, under the command of General Francisco Javier Castanos, surrounded 18,000 Frenchmen from General Dupont's division. After 3 days of maneuvering in mountainous terrain, Dupont, realizing he was running out of ammunition and drinking water, surrendered. It was the first major land defeat of Napoleon's army in 10 years. The French eagles fell into the dust. The emperor in Paris allegedly broke a porcelain plate upon hearing the news. But here is a little-known detail. After the surrender, the Spaniards captured Dupont's baggage train. Among the trophies, they discovered not only gold and artillery, but also 17 detailed topographic maps of southern Spain at a scale of 1:50,000. They marked not only roads and rivers, but also wells, fords, heights suitable for artillery placement, and even mule tracks. The Spanish army had no such maps. Until 1808, the Spanish General Staff had no topographic service at all. Commanders used 17th century road books and oral directions from local shepherds. Castanos called a council of war. The proposal was to turn south immediately, within 48 hours, take Malaga and Cadiz, and cut the French off from the sea. But without maps, no one risked leading the army through unfamiliar mountainous terrain. During the week of delay, Napoleon deployed fresh divisions, and the Spaniards were pushed back. If a mapping service had existed in Spain, perhaps the Peninsular War would have ended in 1808, and Wellington's British troops wouldn't have had to fight for another 5 years. The lesson was learned. In 1810, the Cortes of Cadiz decreed the creation of the Deposito de la Guerra, the first Spanish cartographic office. The first national map of Spain was completed only in 1868. Fact 12. 2 gold reserves in one city. The Segovian Adventure of 1936. The Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, is famous for the international brigades, Guadalajara, and the bombing of Guernica. But there is an episode that resembles the script of a heist movie. At the beginning of the war, the Republican government shipped the gold reserve of the Bank of Spain, 510 tons of gold, about 80% of the world's reserves at the time, to Moscow to pay for weapons. This Moscow gold never returned. But almost simultaneously, in July 1936, a group of Francoist officers in Segovia seized the local branch of the Bank of Spain, which held 70 tons of gold and 200 tons of silver, remnants from previous mintings and church donations. The Republican army besieged the Alcazar, the fortress on a rock where the Francoists holed up with the gold, on July 18th. The siege lasted 69 days. The Republicans stormed the fortress 3 times, mined tunnels, and tried to cut off the water supply. Inside the Alcazar were 1,200 defenders, including the wives and children of the officers, 70 tons of gold and bullion, and 200 tons of pre-war silver coins. Both sides understood that gold was the key to financing the war, but neither could use it. The Republicans couldn't enter the fortress, and the Francoists couldn't smuggle the treasure out. According to legend, the fortress commander, Colonel Moscardo, sent a signalman up the tower once every 3 days to display a gold bar under fire, as a sign that the treasure was safe. On September 21, 1936, a Francoist column broke the siege. The gold was transported to Burgos in 30 trucks guarded by cavalry. In Burgos, Franco personally ordered 10 peseta coins with a profile of the Caudillo to be minted from this gold, the nationalists' first independent currency. Meanwhile, The Republicans had to pay with Moscow gold down to the last gram. Today, you can visit the Segovia Alcazar, and in its museum lies one of those bars. It still bears a scratch from a bullet fired on September 3, 1936. Fact 13. Operation Felisa. How Spain almost swallowed Portugal in 24 hours. After the fall of France in June 1940, Hitler met Franco in the town of Hendaye on the Franco-Spanish border. The Chancellor proposed. Spain enters the war on the side of the Axis, receives Gibraltar after seizing the British Rock, and French Morocco with the city of Oujda. Franco replied, "We will think about it," and asked for a supply list of grain, gasoline, and modern tanks. Hitler later told his staff, "You cannot deal with this man. He asks for more than France would have asked if she had won." But few know that simultaneously with the negotiations, Franco ordered the General Staff to develop Plan Felisa, Operación Feliz, an invasion of Portugal. The plan was shockingly ambitious. 3 columns totaling 200,000 men with 500 artillery pieces were to cross the border at 4 a.m. The first column from Salamanca was to capture Lisbon via the bridge over the Tagus River. The second from Badajoz was to take Faro and seal off the southern coast. The third, from Orense, was to move on Porto. The time to capture the entire country was estimated at 24 hours, as the Portuguese army then had only 50,000 poorly armed soldiers. But why would Franco attack a neighbor that was formally neutral? The reason: Germany demanded the Azores Islands for submarine bases, and Franco wanted to use the capture of Portugal as a bargaining chip to extort larger grain supplies from Hitler. The operation was stopped personally by Franco 3 weeks after the Hendaye meeting, when it became clear that England would not surrender, and the British fleet would immediately blockade the entire Spanish coast in the event of an invasion. The Felisa documents were kept in the archives of the General Staff in Madrid until 2005, when they were declassified. According to a note by Colonel Sanchez Fernandez, the advancing troops had orders not to destroy bridges and electrical substations, as Portugal must become an integral province. Fact 14. 3,000 forgotten villages, the liveliest ghosts of Europe. Spain is the leader in Western Europe in terms of completely abandoned settlements. According to the Ministry of Development, as of recent years, more than 3,000 villages and hamlets have zero permanent residents, but remain on the official register. The most famous of them is Aldeasica in the province of Soria, Castile and Leon. The village was abandoned in 1964 when the last 3 families left for Barcelona to find work. For 60 years, the houses were not dismantled and barely looted. Local lawmakers banned the removal of even door hinges under threat of a €15,000 fine, officially as protection of intangible cultural heritage. In House Number 11, a copy of the Pueblo newspaper from March 22, 1964, still lies on the table. In the kitchen, a kerosene lamp with a wick. In the children's room, a rag doll with a torn-off head. An even stranger story belongs to the Aragonese village of Ascain, province of Huesca. In 1970, 112 people lived there, but due to the construction of a reservoir, the land was flooded, except for 2 streets on a hill. The authorities offered compensation to the residents, but 15 elderly people refused to leave. They lived without electricity, with a single well, and a postman who visited once a month. The last resident died in 2019 at the age of 93. Now the village legally exists, but every year on May 1st, former residents, their children and grandchildren, gather in the square, unlock the church, the only building with an intact roof, and listen to Mass. Moreover, the mayor of the neighboring municipality to which Ascain is annexed refuses to remove it from the registry, because for every inhabited unit, even with 0 population, the province allocates a grant for roads, and the money goes into the budget of neighboring villages. Thus, a dead village feeds a living one. Fact 15. The flag of Spain. Everyone has been drawing it wrong for 239 years. The red and yellow banner is familiar to anyone who has watched football or vacationed on the Costa del Sol. But few know that the proportions everyone sees on souvenirs, t-shirts, and in textbooks do not comply with the law. On May 28, 1785, King Charles III approved a flag for the Navy to distinguish Spanish ships from the white-crossed fleets of the French and English. He chose a balanced combination: 3 stripes, red, yellow, red. But the secret is that the yellow stripe is exactly twice as wide as each red one, a 1:2:1 ratio. Why? Naval engineers explained that at a distance of several miles, narrow stripes blur together. But if the middle one is wide, the colors are distinguishable even in fog. However, as early as the 19th century, civilian manufacturers simplified the design. They were too lazy to cut cloth with varying widths, so they began sewing stripes of equal width, 1:1:1. By the 1890s, this folk version had penetrated barracks, schools, and the consciousness of Spaniards. Law 39/1981 clearly prescribed a wide yellow stripe. Yet, in 99% of commercial products, flags for Real Madrid and Barca fans, badges, postcards, the stripes are equal. When a Spanish swimmer was disqualified at the Rio Olympics because his cap featured the wrong flag equal stripes, the Minister of Culture stated, "This is a tradition. We will not fine our own." In addition, the law requires the coat of arms, since 1981, without Franco's eagle, to be shifted toward the flagpole by 1/3 of the flag's length. In practice, it is slapped right in the center. And the strangest detail, at the bottom of the coat of arms, a pomegranate is depicted, the symbol of Granada. By law, the pomegranate fruit must always be turned with its sepals downward. This remains from when the Catholic Monarchs took Granada in 1492 and turned the Muslim crescent on the towers of the Alhambra upside down as a sign of Islam's defeat. An upside-down pomegranate on the flag is technically treason against state specifications, but nobody checks. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like. Write in the comments which country you want to see next, and what facts you're most curious about. See you in the next episode.